Everyone. Do you know that sport where you have to ski really, really fast, and then at some point you have to drop down and take your rifle and shoot something that's like 200 meters away or something like that, and you have to be really accurate. So that sport actually exists. It's called the biathlon, as you probably know. It's been at the Olympics since the 60s, so it's got quite a history, and it's pretty tough. And a lot of the difficulty here comes from the fact that you have to turn your heart rate up to go really fast on skis, and then calm down, still yourself, and shoot very accurately. And there are also other disciplines based on this idea, like chess boxing, which is same thing. You box someone, you punch them really hard, and then in between the punches, you have to play chess with them. Naturally, as you know, there's also a similar discipline that you might be familiar with, which is product development in 2025. This is also a real thing, and it requires you to sit at a laptop all day usually, and constantly switch between the different modes of working. And you can almost imagine it yourselves, I'm sure. You're sitting at home, you went to get some coffee, and you come back, you have 11 new emails, 5 new meetings, you want to start your Figma or your document. You have this idea, but you think to yourself, oh, first I need to align with some of my teams about what we're actually doing, and we need to communicate about that. And then maybe you've already generated like 7 different UI prototypes, but you think, oh, now I'm going to switch into this feedback receiving mode, and I'm going to have to organize this workshop meeting where... My point is that we constantly switch between these focused delivery modes and this connecting and aligning mode. This extreme sport thing is probably a bit of a hyperbole, but even Julie Zhu, who's the author of The Making of a Manager, an iconic management book, she recently observed that more and more of us are beginning to operate in between the different states, sometimes executing, sometimes connecting, sometimes designing processes. And there's going to be less pure managers and less pure individual contributors in the future. So, hello everybody, I'm Maciej, and for the last couple of years I have the pleasure of leading various design teams at Zendesk. This is a customer experience platform, and my team is responsible for shipping AI solutions basically that help human beings use the various products that we have. Now, product design at Zendesk is a team of 100 people, and maybe this map isn't really up to date, but the point here is that we have to work across time zones, across different countries, and across different product silos and product areas. And we all want to ship a product that is cohesive and understandable by all our customers. And as most of you, we do this in an environment of constant change. The pandemic forced us to be remote. We reorganized. The leadership changed. We welcomed new teams, we sunset old teams, we reorganized again, there was more leadership changes, and at some point we started seeing more and more friends in our group that came from completely new teams that joined via acquisitions. And obviously nobody was bored. And then ChatGPT was released, and this turned into this whole AI craziness, which sparked a push for AI solutions within our industry, which meant that now we had to work even faster, and everything sped up. So I suspect that our problem isn't very rare. It's probably pretty common, which is we want to ship the most cohesive, the most mindful product that takes into account the complexities of building a large-scale SaaS product and the complexities of all of our customers and all of their businesses. But we also want to ship it yesterday. So it's not about the destination, except it is. And by the way, AI for sure can help us produce things faster, but I will leave that subject to others to talk about. Instead, I want to focus on the rest of the pie chart in terms of how we spend our time. Not individual efficiency, but the efficiency of us connecting as an org, the organization. Things like sharing work between the different teams globally. Things like making sure that we do create the space to have the right conversations. or that we build trust within leadership and we can work together. And whether your particular team has these kinds of problems, it almost doesn't matter here. Like, obviously, that's going to depend on the scale of the company, on the maturity of the processes and systems, on your particular definition of quality in this moment, or how flat the structure is at your org. But I think what we did in the last couple of years was pretty unique, and I wanna share with you 2 ways that we went about achieving some of these goals. And specifically, within the product design management, we went about it by building the culture of cross-team rituals and moving away from agenda-driven status meetings towards facilitating leadership connection at the management and leadership level. So what are rituals? Let's start there. Obviously, you know what a retro is. It's a classic example where a team meets and they share what they can do better, what they can do, what's going well, what's not going well. What makes a ritual is what makes it a ritual is the fact that there's a familiar template, so everybody can jump into it immediately. There's a schedule, so we can depend on it being there. And incidentally, if you're running on your skis in a biathlon, it really helps knowing when you're going to have to stop and calm yourself. And of course, nobody has time for a retro every Tuesday, but if you as a leader want to achieve some goal out of your organization, rituals are a way for you to reduce the amount of work that needs to happen around that. Like, imagine having to convince everybody every single time the retro is needed. A lot of the time, it just doesn't happen. So it's a way for leaders to operationalize a need of a team. And I think with sufficient leadership buy-in, rituals can also be used to operationalize needs that span multiple teams in a global organization. One such example from our practice is what we call the design huddle, or because it was the European edition, we added the little umlaut out there, so it was design huddle. Obviously, each team had their own design critique, but we wanted a design crit that would span multiple teams because we wanted to hear more varied feedback from people with different perspectives. We wanted to elevate best practices. We saw that some people do design crit really well and others could learn from them. We wanted to share knowledge so that everybody understands more or less how different pieces of the product work. And in general, we wanted to increase the maturity of our practice. So we set a schedule, we assigned owners, we put it on the calendars and set the expectations for the team. We also created a template. And the template itself included a lot of the things that we thought make for a good crit. Like, what's the user context? What's the definition of success of the project? What's the scope of the crit? What do you want feedback about and what you maybe are not concerned about at the moment? And that allowed new joiners to ramp up real quick. And it allowed the experienced designers to still be a little bit more creative and experimental with the template. That also allowed content design and the design systems team to join a single meeting and give feedback, and it allowed leadership to have some more visibility. But more importantly than all of that, it allowed us to improve a thing over time. So for example, when we wanted to foster more of a feeling of community, we included icebreakers at the beginning of every meeting so that everybody can start getting to know each other. When things were getting stale and we saw that each team does the same thing and it starts looking a little bit boring, and honestly we wanted the team to experiment with more methodologies, we included a menu of inspiration to show that this thing can be multiple things. It was getting too much for us as management to organize, so we redesigned how we set the schedule and pushed the ownership towards the team. But of course, not all of the changes were good, and sometimes we had to back out. Like, for example, when we wanted to increase the visibility of the design work across the product organization, and we included product leadership in this meeting, only to uninvite them a couple months later, because what we saw is that people started over-preparing way too much. The important part is we were not reinventing the wheel and creating new meetings and thinking about completely new ways of doing things. We were adjusting and adapting an existing team ritual that was, big enough to be able to handle these various needs. At some point, we even had the opportunity to use the same meeting to experiment with design pairing, as you see in the picture. It was all experimentation without adding extra things to the calendar and without making a, quote-unquote, whole thing about it. So here's another example of a cross-team ritual. Design readout is a quarterly review of the work in progress across our company. And each team, the way it works is that each team has a couple projects that they share. There's a template, and there's a 2-minute sort of live update in a meeting. While the responsibility on connecting us and spotting overlaps still lies on management, what we found is that this provided the necessary visibility not only to leadership, but also to the teams. And what it allowed us to do is sometimes spot overlaps, like multiple people working on analytics at the same time, and in some cases, even proactively start aligning on UI solutions so that we don't build, let's say, 7 new chat interfaces. Is anybody working on chat interfaces nowadays? Right. And of course, this ritual also changed over time. We iterated, we added screenshots because we found that looking at the actual thing really helps understand what that thing is. We connected those projects to OKRs, and at some point, we also included a question about how does this project contribute to our internal quality metrics. This particular ritual was introduced within a small group of EMEA teams, but since 2024, it became a global ritual. And now it connects all of our product design teams across multiple time zones within 2 meetings to be mindful of people's time of work. Okay, last example here, just to show you how rituals can also be used to solve simpler problems. The opportunity we saw here was that whenever designers would have a conversation with someone from GTM, so let's say sales representatives or success managers, those conversations were always incredibly valuable for people. And normally in a startup, which most of us on the team used to work at startups, normally we'd just hang around the kitchen and just have a conversation with people. But at the scale of Zendesk, it wasn't really available to us at the time. So we wanted to prepare some ritual, again, for the teams to be able to sign up for a conversation with GTM. From the perspective of the team, it was just an easy way to organize a meeting with the people who are making sure that customers are getting the product into their hands. But from the perspective of management, it was again, ritual. It was scheduled. We had a system of finding the right partners who had experience with the part of the product that the team was working on. And we saw what created value. So we could then coach the next team how to adjust. In this case, we initially thought that this was just going to be another design crit with a different audience, but we found that most of the value was from the conversation, from the loose chat afterwards. So we shifted to use design as conversation starters. Experimenting with rituals became our team culture. And each ritual was, of course, a product of its time and solving the specific needs we had in mind. And neither of them is the best way of doing something. Instead, the approach is what matters most. Calling these things names and thinking about them as rituals allowed us to apply a perspective similar to what we try to do in product development, to design something, ship it, learn, and iterate. It allowed us not to organize a new meeting every time we had an idea, but maintaining those rituals allowed us to influence how things get done without feeling too micromanagey, adding new things to people's calendars, or really without spending that much time on it. And it all wouldn't be possible if the management team itself wasn't aligned. So we needed a way, as managers, as leaders in the organization, to be able to work together as a functional team. We didn't really have the luxury to run a special program for any of our great ideas. And as it happens, we also started using a similar ritualized practice ourselves. To connect across multiple teams, we created a preset agenda, we had an asynchronous template to which everybody contributed, and we had just enough facilitation to make sure that we get through the meeting. In terms of the template, what worked for us was very simple, a small snippet or a small section for leadership top of mind, where we talked and digested the various company-wide announcements and strategy. And then each person on the call has a small again, section when they share one thing synchronously and can add multiple things asynchronously as Post-it notes. Importantly, whenever someone saw something that they would like to hear more about, they could add a star, and we would also pick that subject up during the meeting to talk some stuff through. Again, template changed over time. This is becoming a recurring thing here. We started time boxing much more efficiently to allow for the spontaneous conversation when it was needed. We divided the sharing section into portfolio and practice, just to make sure that we don't over-index and overshare on either of those areas of work. And we added things like team accomplishments to figure out what do we think great work looks like. And of course, because we were managers, we added a section to capture action items and follow-ups. Now, if it sounds a little bit robotic to you at this point, or maybe you're asking yourself, how is this different from just like people meeting and having an agenda? I think the true difference comes from our experience with workshopping. And if you have experience with facilitating groups, you know that the right framework is not there just for us to fill in the details. It's to make sure that we have the right conversation among the right people and that we drive things forward. So the fact that it was a ritual allowed us to meet on a regular cadence and communicate. But the real difference was the shift from this agenda-driven, top-heavy meeting towards something that enabled teamwork and trust building and energized the group. This meeting is what enabled us to create the rituals that I talked about previously and make the necessary calls that spanned multiple different teams. And it really touched them and changed the way that they work. Again, this kicked off in EMEA, and now multiple teams across the world are using it to connect different time zones. So, to move on to a more practical note, if anybody is thinking about experimenting with something like this, with this kind of approach, I have a couple pieces of advice here. First of all, being clear about your purpose really, really helps. Write down what you want to accomplish and figure out the rest based on that. This can guide all of your decisions. Secondly, maintaining a spirit of experimentation. I think it's not about copy-pasting what we do. It's about figuring out what the team needs are in your organizations and what tools you have to be able to cater to those needs. Thirdly, being inclusive about designing these rituals can help you build the buy-in amongst the teams. So sometimes it's about listening to feedback, but sometimes it's about involving the team in creating the ritual template itself. From our experience, thinking about this as scrapbooks rather than tax documents is slightly better. But of course, this is going to depend on your teams. Next, time boxing and being mindful of time. Obviously, facilitate the meeting. Having someone to facilitate it is an important piece of it. And then also having a way to contribute both synchronously and asynchronously really helps in the cases where people maybe cannot make it. Overall, one last thing, and that's really important, which is remembering that we're still humans and social dynamics are a thing. And what that means is if the group is too small, maybe it feels like we don't need it. If the group's too big, maybe it means we've outgrown a particular ritual. This was definitely the case in our situation. The audience that you invite should support the purpose that you set out to yourself. And overall, over time, these kinds of rituals can really influence how the team shows up to work and what is considered normal at your organization. Is it fine to have cameras off? Do you joke around and play music, or are you serious? What kinds of things do you celebrate? What do you consider successful? Lastly, don't be afraid to start small. This is definitely a two-way door situation. Rituals are a powerful tool, but they can also be a powerful tool at a small scale, as well as at a big scale. And don't be afraid to end them either. Not everything has to work. So hopefully, I was able to inspire some of you to start thinking about this way in terms of improving the meetings, maybe not having more of them, but adjusting and adapting something that the team starts to get to know. We, for sure, will keep evolving. Some of our rituals, as I mentioned, grew from a small group of teams to a large organization, but we had to kill others, or we wanted to kill others, and others ended really or were replaced by new versions. However, as I mentioned, throughout the last couple of years, nobody was really twiddling their thumbs. We were all pretty busy with delivery, and somehow we retained this ritual culture and a lot of these meetings as part of our practice. So I think this is at least a small testament to the fact that this is useful. And personally, I believe this is because those things allowed us to do something that we would normally have to do across additional workshops, one-on-ones, coffees, water cooler conversations. It allowed us to slow down for just a moment in the middle of the race to do what's necessary as a team. Now, the biathlon's origins go back to the 18th century. This was originally, I think, a Norwegian military drill. And I'd say it came a long way since then. Next year, there's going to be Winter Olympics in Italy, and there's going to be, I think, 5 or 6 different competitions that originated in a biathlon. And there's going to be representatives from over 20 countries skiing, shooting, speeding up really fast, just to slow down really quickly. And personally, I'm looking forward to watching other people do it on TV. And thank you very much for your time.